Today we're going to talk about the musculoskeletal system. It involves muscles and your skeleton. Right, lean on me. All organisms need some form of support, so they'll either have an exoskeleton, which would be like a hard covering or a shell, and that would be an outside support, or they'll have an endoskeleton, which means their skeleton is inside. And that would be things obviously like fish, amphibians, reptiles, humans, and our exoskeletons would be things like beetles and such. The human skeleton is made of cartilage and bone. Cartilage is what's in your earlobes and your nose. It doesn't have any nerves or blood vessels running through it. And your bone is connective tissue that contains nerves and blood vessels. So your bone doesn't necessarily feel, but your bone has nerves and blood vessels running through it. So they're kind of a connection system for your body. Bones are made of collagen and calcium salts. That's why you gotta drink your milk, have your calcium. And they're a dynamic tissue that will change shape when osteoblasts, which are bone building cells, and osteoclasts, which are bone breaking cells, remodel it. So that's how your bones can grow with you as you grow over time, is those bone building and breaking cells will continuously change the shape of your bones. Bones are held together by joints, like your shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint, you've got your knee joint, and joints are held together by ligaments. Ligaments attach bone to bone, and tendons attach muscle to bone. So ligaments, bone to bone, tendons, muscle to bone. So why do we have a skeleton and muscles? Well, we need to move around, right? Some things are what we call sessile. They don't move. So these mollusks sit right here and they just wait for food to come to them. Okay, so the food just comes right in and they pick it out of the water. Here, our kangaroos are jumping all around and they can go find whatever food they want. They can run away from predators. Right, these guys are ripe for the taking if anyone wants to eat them. Lots of ways to get around. You can see fast running. Underwater, we've got our mollusk or a reptile that's underwater. Here we have another mammal. We have an arthropod, a bird, so all sorts of different ways. All right, so but how do you get around? Well, there's different types of muscles. There's skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle controls voluntary movements. So that's things like doing push-ups, reading your textbook, picking something up, texting. Those are all voluntary movements. And the skeletal muscle is attached to the skeleton. It's striated muscle, so it's kind of got a stripy look to it. If you were to be able to look at your muscle, you'd see it look kind of stripy. And it is multinucleated, so it's got more than one nucleus in its cells. It also has rapid contractions. Then we have smooth muscle, which has involuntary movements, so it's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. It's attached to the walls of the digestive tract or inside of blood vessels. And it's what we call a slow contraction. And then cardiac muscle also has involuntary movements. Thankfully, your heart can beat on its own. And the muscle is attached to the wall of the heart. And it is striated, so it's got the stripy look too. And it's got an intermediate speed of contraction. So here you can see it. We've got our skeletal muscle, voluntary, striated. So it's got the stripes to it. Our smooth muscle, it's involuntary movements, non-striated, so it kind of has its own little thing going on, but not stripy. Then the cardiac muscle, striated, stripy here. We've got an intercalated disc. We'll talk about what that is. All right, the human skeleton. There are 206 bones in the human body. That is all I need you to know as far as the skeleton is concerned. Alright, how do muscles move? Muscles do work by contracting. And skeletal muscles come in antagonistic pairs. So one would be a flexor and one would be an extensor. So you'd flex or extend. Contracting equals shortening. And we move skeletal parts in order to do that. So again, tendons connect bone to muscle and ligaments are bone to bone. So here we've got a triceps extensor and a biceps flexor. So right now we're contracting the biceps flexor. Here we go, bicep contracts, bicep relaxes, tricep contracts. So right here the tricep is relaxed, but then it contracts as the arm straightens out. Same here with your flexors and extensors in your leg. So the organization of skeletal muscle. Here we've got a bone, and then we've got a tendon, right? Because tendons attach bone to muscle. Here's our skeletal muscle. Breaks down into these are fascicles, and then this is a muscle fiber right here. See, we're pulling out from here. Then we have myofibrils, which are even smaller little divisions, and then myofilaments, which are even tinier ones that come out of there. A sarcomere is an individual unit of the muscle fiber or the muscle cell. And then these are the nuclei that's multinucleated. And then here's our plasma membrane. So that is our organization of skeletal muscle. So what's the structure of that striated skeletal muscle? Well, we have sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are our functional unit of muscle contraction. They are the alternating bands of thin actin and thick myosin filaments. So here's our sarcomere, right here to here. That's a sarcomere, and it's got bands of actin and myosin, thin and thick, and we'll talk through what that looks like. So you've got the sarcomere right here. Here's our little look at it. Actin and myosin. Myosin's the thick one, right? And our thin ones are actin and tropomyosin coiled together. So the thin, you've got this actin molecule, and then here we've got tropomyosin right in here, intertwined, and then troponin, we'll talk about what that does. It blocks a binding site right here. All twisted up in the actin, but it's thin. Now myosin, a myosin molecule is this long protein with this little globular head. It's the head of myosin. So a myosin filament is a bunch of these stuck together. So it's kind of like red vines all here with little things sticking out on either side. This is a myosin head, and they make a big, long, thick rope out of it. So we've got myosin tails aligned together, and the head's pointed away from the center of the sarcomere. So here's the center of the sarcomere, that section of our muscle. This is what we call the bare zone. So obviously there's nothing here. So here's our myosin, here's our actin, thick and thin. Okay, so you can kind of see how they're overlapped. And everything that happens is going to pull into here. So either way, it's going to be pulling this way and this way to bring it in. Alright, so how do they actually interact? Well, they make something called cross bridges. And those cross bridges are connections that form between the myosin heads, those globular heads, in the thick filament, and the actin in the thin filaments. And so that causes the muscle to shorten or contract. So here's our sarcomere. Here's the center of our sarcomere, the bare area. And as this happens, as this binds and pulls, it pulls it in tighter. So there's less bare area in the middle of the sarcomere now. And that pulls the muscle in either side, and so that makes it contract. Alright, so what actually happens in muscle contraction? Well, a motor neuron from the nervous system releases acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter. Then that neurotransmitter binds with receptors on the muscle fiber and causes an action potential. That action potential stimulates the release of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which stores calcium ions. Then those calcium ions bind to the troponin molecules that are wound up with the thin actin, and it exposes the myosin binding sites on the actin filaments so that it can bind. So here then we've got a myosin head that had ATP in it. Here's our binding site, and the calcium came in and made the troponin go away, so now we can see the binding site. Then this ATP splits to turn into phosphate and adenosine diphosphate. So it gives off one phosphate. It was triphosphate, TP, and now it's diphosphate, DP. So it gives off a phosphate, turns into ADP, and it bends its head one way, and then it binds to the binding site, makes what we call a cross bridge. Then as it makes this cross bridge, the actin binding site causes this to form ATP, and it gives it off and makes the head tilt, and so it pushes the actin this way towards, and so it makes that bare area in the center of the sarcomere shorter. So the myosin pulls the actin chain along toward the center of the sarcomere, so it takes it toward the center. The sarcomere then shortens, so the Z lines, the lines on either side of the sarcomere, here and here, move closer together, and that means the muscle contracts. Here's a closer look at a muscle cell. We've got our sarcoplasmic reticulum, stores our calcium ions. We've got our myofibril, mitochondria, and some transverse or T tubules. The nucleus, here's another nucleus. The Z line, right? So here's our sarcomere from Z line to Z line. And then a sarcolemma is what we call this outside. So our muscle cell organelles, we've got sarcoplasm, which is our muscle cell cytoplasm. It has many mitochondria in it. Then we have our sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is an organelle similar to the endoplasmic reticulum. It's just a network of tubes. And it stores the calcium ions. Then those calcium ions are released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum through channels, and then that calcium ions are pumped to restore calcium to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So you remove calcium from the cytosol, and then the pumps use ATP to put it back. Alright, so here's our muscle at rest. We have interacting proteins. So at rest, these troponin molecules, right here, these purple things, hold tropomyosin fibers, okay, this is tropomyosin, this skinny gray rope, so that they cover the myosin binding sites on actin. So here's where the binding site would be, but it is currently covered with troponin and the tropomyosin fibers. So it can't bind, it can't contract. Then a motor neuron says, hey, move it. And so it triggers a muscle contraction. That nerve signal stimulates the muscle cell's sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Then the calcium comes in, binds with the troponin, and then it starts moving. So here we're covering the binding sites. See, as we've got these holes on these orange balls. Then this starts moving because it's not sticking here anymore and opens up the myosin binding site. So then we can have the myosin head bind with the actin and pull it to the center of the sarcomere and contract. The sliding filament model. All right, so exposed actin binds, here's our exposed actin, binds to myosin, the myosin head right here, and then the fibers slide past each other, kind of a ratchet system. If you don't know what a ratchet is, go home and use one. Okay, then you can shorten the muscle cell. That's our muscle contraction. The muscle does not relax until this calcium is pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Otherwise, the calcium just sits here and it just keeps going and going, or holding it there one way or the other. We need ATP for both of those things. Alright, so how does it all work? Action potential causes calcium released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. I will finish this on the next video.